All right, let's just jump right in. I want you to imagine a company spending over $4 billion to develop a cure, a truly groundbreaking medicine, for only a few hundred people. I mean, it sounds like a business plan that makes absolutely no sense, right? But this is the very real story of a drug called Qalsody, and it's a story about incredible science, just staggering costs, and of course, profound hope.
So, to even begin to understand how this is possible, we gotta start with a question that feels like it's pulled straight from a sci-fi movie. What if you could find the one single bad instruction inside your body that's causing a disease, and you could just turn it off? Well, that's not science fiction anymore. It's the real idea behind this amazing new technology.
So how in the world does it work? Well, probably the best way to think about this whole approach is with a pretty simple analogy. Let's just call it the tiny robot fix.
Okay, so the official name for this technology is an ASO, which stands for antisense oligonucleotide. But you can totally forget the jargon. Just think of it like this. Your body is like a big factory that's always making proteins. But sometimes it gets faulty instructions, this bad RNA, and it starts making harmful proteins that cause a disease. An ASO is basically a tiny lab-made robot that's programmed to do one thing, find that one specific bad instruction and step in.
And the process is just unbelievably precise. It's like a molecular sniper. First, it hones in on that very specific piece of bad RNA. Then it latches on, sticking to it like two pieces of a puzzle. And finally, and this is really the whole point, it either blocks the instruction, kind of like hitting a pause button, or it actually calls in a helper to completely destroy that bad message. And the end result? The factory just stops making the toxic protein. Simple as that.
So, now that we have that incredible science in our back pocket, let's see how it applies to the real-world story of this drug, Qalsody. Because this was a decade-long, multi-billion-dollar journey to get from the lab to actual patients.
The target here is just a brutal disease, ALS. It's where the brain's messengers to the muscles basically die off. But Qalsody doesn't treat all forms of ALS. It's specifically designed for a very, very rare genetic form that's caused by a mutation in a single gene called SOD1. This mutation turns a protein that's normally helpful into something toxic. And get this, it only affects about 2% of all ALS patients. You got to remember that number. It's super important later.
And the path to get this drug approved was anything but fast. It was a whole decade-long quest. You can see it started with a partnership way back in 2013. But what's really fascinating is what happened in 2021. The main clinical trial, well, it didn't technically show patients getting physically stronger, which was its primary goal. But, and this is a big but, another set of data that measured the actual level of nerve damage showed a dramatic drop. The evidence that the disease was slowing down was so powerful that the FDA granted what's called accelerated approval in 2023. It was a huge, huge moment.
This story is also a perfect example of what's a classic biotech partnership. So on one side, you have Ionis, these brilliant innovators who pioneered the ASO technology and actually designed the drug. And then on the other side, you have Biogen, a neurology powerhouse with the really deep pockets and all the expertise to fund these massive, expensive late-stage trials and deal with the super complex global approval process. Basically, one discovers and the other develops.
So, we've got the science, we've got the story of this incredible medical breakthrough. But now let's get to the part of the equation that just seems to defy all logic, the economics. Let's talk about the price of this cure.
The estimated total investment to get Qalsody from just an idea to an approved drug that you can prescribe is staggering. We're talking $4 to $5 billion. Just let that sink in for a second.
And that $4 to $5 billion investment, it was made for this many people, roughly 500 eligible patients in the entire United States. Yeah, the numbers just don't seem to add up at all.
Which, of course, leads us to the billion-dollar question itself. How can a business model like this possibly be sustainable? I mean, how do you justify that kind of investment for such a tiny, tiny group of patients?
Well, the answer really comes down to understanding that there are two totally different worlds of drug economics. We're all familiar with the traditional model, right? You make a drug for millions of people, you sell it at a pretty low price, and you make your money on just massive volume. But for rare diseases, there's another model, the orphan drug model. And here, the price for one unit is incredibly high to make up for the fact that the sales volume is super low. And crucially, this model is supported by government incentives, things like tax credits and years of market exclusivity, all designed to encourage companies to go after these really tough rare diseases.
So how does this actually work for a patient? Well, the list price is about $170,000 a year, but most major insurers do cover it, though usually after a really rigorous approval process. And for folks who are uninsured or underinsured, there's a critical safety net. Biogen has a patient support program that can bring the copay all the way down to zero for eligible patients. So you see the bigger picture. The high price tag lets the company slowly make back its massive investment, while all the insurance and support programs make sure people can actually get it.
So let's zoom out a bit. What does this one drug really mean for the bigger picture? Is Qalsody just a one-off miracle, or does its journey signal a new dawn for treating a disease that for so long has been notoriously difficult to fight?
Turns out, Qalsody isn't the end of the story. It's really more of a catalyst. Its success has fueled a boom in development for ALS. There is now a whole pipeline of similar ASO therapies that are targeting other genetic mutations linked to the disease, like C9orf72 and UNC13A. That door has really been kicked wide open.
But the future, it isn't entirely simple. Qalsody's approval actually sends a kind of mixed signal to the industry. So on one hand, it's this massive proof of concept. It shows that targeting rare genetic diseases is a strategy that can work. But on the other hand, the really slow and pretty modest return on investment, the ROI, that's a bit of a cautionary tale for investors who are looking for bigger, faster profits.
Which leaves us with one final, big question to think about. Is this whole story a blueprint for future medical miracles, proving that with enough money and innovation we can conquer these rare genetic diseases one by one? Or is it a really risky financial gamble that maybe very few companies will be willing to take again? The answer? Well, it's going to shape the future of medicine for years to come.